deja vu there. Seems like that has happened before. Is that better?
He's on. He's on.
Okay. This brings back memories. Okay. Sorry. This brings back memories of a couple years ago. But more than that, I'm sure there are a few of you who are no different than I, who have had memories of past incidents, memories that just seem bigger than what they really were. For some of you, you may have experienced events that just seem to grow larger with every passing year. But that was not the case for me, at least not with this particular incident. This incident could not have gotten any bigger or larger than it really was. In fact, I have to pinch myself every so often just to remember how big and how real it really was. My name is Jarius. Your gospel writers refer to me as a ruler of the synagogue. That would be similar to a church leader or maybe a president of your church congregation in your time. But neither my name nor my position matter here, not at all. What mattered was that what God, Jesus did for our family. For most of you, I'm sure you find it very difficult to even understand what it was like in our time. You today have the modern medicine that you take for granted. The immunizations, the vaccinations that have all but eliminated the diseases that took so many of our young children. We didn't have the doctors or the modern science that you assume today. But still, when our little daughter came down with a very high fever, we were scared to death that we were going to lose her. It was then I decided I was going to seek out Jesus. The doctor had told us and checked on her. He came and he laid a cool, damp cloth on her forehead. The following day, he came to check on our daughter, only to find that her condition had deteriorated. It was then he began to prepare us that our daughter might not make it. Now, as a ruler of a synagogue, I sat in on many discussions about Jesus. Some said he was a prophet. Others said he was a wonderful teacher. Some had actually seen his miracles. Even a story of a man born blind and how Jesus made him whole again. Yet, there were a few skeptics out there. He's not from God, he's from the devil. But I'd seen this Jesus. I had seen his miracles. He represented the only hope that we had for our little daughter. Later that day, we had heard news that Jesus was going to visit our village. And that morning, when I got up and I went to the lake, I could see Jesus coming around the lakeside. I was there. but so were a lot of other people. It seemed like wherever Jesus would travel, huge, huge crowds would follow him. At this point, I was not sure what the protocol is in this situation. I thought the crowd was pushing, but something just came over me, a force. And I decided I was going to see Jesus and talk to him. It pulled me towards him. I began to work my way through the crowd, pushing and shoving, stepping on feet and toes. But that did not allow my eyes to not see Jesus. It seemed like a split second had gone by, and I realized I was standing in front of Jesus, eye to eye. Oh, it seemed like eternity. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. But I dropped to my knees, to his feet, and began to plead, and beg that he would please come to our home, that he would at least lay his healing hand on my daughter. As I knelt there, I didn't know what he was going to say or do. But then he took me by my arm, and he helped me rise to my feet. And he looked at me in a very direct but soft voice. Show me to your home. Before I knew it, we were heading towards our home. The crowd was following. Oh, it was so busy. As we were approaching, I couldn't believe he was actually coming to my home. I tried to tell him what my name was. I tried to talk to him. At least tell him what the condition of my daughter was. And very abruptly, he stopped. Who touched me? He asked. The disciples, looking very puzzled, looked around. And they said, Master, all of these hundreds of people, you ask who touched you? Jesus paused for a moment and then continued on. Someone touched me. I felt the power go out of me. A few minutes had passed, and a woman came forth out of the crowd. Oh, she was shaking and trembling with fear. She dropped to Jesus' feet. She didn't know what to say. Looking at him, she said, I have had this disorder. I have been bleeding for 12 years, and no one can help me. I have not felt worthy to even come to you and ask you for help. But yet I thought if I could just reach out and touch your robe, that I might be healed. Jesus, with a smile, took her by the hand and helped her to her feet. He said, Daughter, your belief has healed you. Now go in peace and be rid of your suffering. Oh, by that time, my hopes had soared. If Jesus could heal a woman by her simply touching the robe, certainly he could heal my daughter. But as soon as I had that thought, we approached my home, and I could see some friends. Some friends were coming out. One look at their face, and I knew my hopes were all in vain. My friend said, Your daughter has died. There's no need to bother the master anymore. My heart fell. I almost collapsed. He put his arm around me and said, Let me help you home. But Jesus, just as if ignoring what was said, all the terrible things, he looked at me and he said, Do not be afraid. Just believe. He instructed the disciples to stay with the crowd, except for three, Peter, James, and Paul. They walked with us. We went to my home. And as we entered the home, all the mourners were wailing and crying so loudly, I could not stand it. Jesus said to them, "Why all the commotion? Why the wailing? This little girl, is asleep, not dead." Well, your Bible describes the mourners as laughing at Jesus. I was there. It was all sarcasm. You don't think that we know when someone is dead or asleep? How dare you come into this man's home and give him false hope? I didn't know what to think. But yet, Jesus had this confidence that he had control over everything that would happen. He immediately ordered the people out of the house. He asked my wife and myself and the three disciples to follow him to my little daughter's room. It was like this fog or haze. I did not know what was happening. Part of me did not want to go. But yet, the other part said I must. We entered my daughter's room, looking at her bed. The color was all gone from her. She was dead. The mourners were right. We were too late. And then without hesitation, Jesus knelt by her side, put his hand on hers, and said, "Little girl, arise, arise." In that moment, color became to her face, her hands, even to her feet, her toes. And then her chest started to move. Was I dreaming this? This could not be happening. And then I saw her eyelids. They began to flicker. Soon they were open. She sat up, turned to her side, and then stood, and then walked around. Our mouths and eyes must have been wide open. For she turned to us, and she asked, "Mother, Father, what is the matter? You look as if you've seen a ghost." Jesus immediately asked his disciples to go and get some water and some food for our daughter. I introduced Jesus to my daughter, and she was so confused. I told her that I would explain the whole story later. Jesus asked me not to tell anyone what had happened. And with that, he turned and he left with his disciples. You should have seen the faces on the mourners outside my home. But more than that, we wanted to know more about Jesus. We wanted to learn more about him. We even went to see him when he was within walking distance. We would listen to his wonderful parables. Some people would tell us stories of his healings. But no one knew but us. In fact, one couple did not know who we were. Told us a story, a miraculous story about how Jesus raised a little girl from the dead to life. They looked at our daughter and said, in fact, she was about her size, about 12. We just smiled and shook her head. Yes, we had heard that story. Amazing, isn't it? Now, some time had passed, and all at once our world was upside down again. We had heard word that Jesus, he had been arrested and crucified. How could that be? How could anyone do that to such a person? How could anyone be so cruel as to take a person so full of life and kill them? It just did not make sense. The rest of the day, my wife and I just wondered how God could possibly let that happen. In fact, to be honest, we began not to believe in God. A God that would let his only son die. But in that moment, news came that people had seen Jesus alive, actually walking. Of course, the excuses started then. Oh, no one can rise from the dead. The disciples probably stole his body. I looked at them and said, no one can rise from the dead? Who do you think you were talking about? I knew that if Jesus could rise up a little girl, bring her back to life, surely Jesus was alive. Yes, he had risen. Jesus had risen. As I think back, when my whole world just seemed upside down, I thought my life was over. I remember Jesus looking at me and saying, do not be afraid. Just believe. Now, before I leave you tonight, I leave you no other words than what Jesus had spoke to me. No matter how hard or difficult your life may be, no matter how hopeless you may feel, remember Jesus' word. Do not be afraid. Just believe.